of superheroes, let me see you take off. I pray you never take your cape off. Even though more time we don't flash straight. But trust me, bro, I promise we gon' die great. Our heavy, but we ain't lightweights. Our parents were legends, they had to migrate. So that's the reason.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Black Tech Unplugged. I'm joined by Senongo Akpem. And Senongo, so great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Senongo, for my guests who might not be familiar with who you are, I want to take a moment and have you do a brief introduction of yourself.
These are always hard. Hi, everybody. I am Senongo Akpem. My pronouns are he and him. I am the VP of Design at Nava, which is a public benefit company, a civic tech company based in Washington, D.C. I myself am based in New York. I am also somewhat of an illustrator, although I don't get as much time to do that as I would like. And have been a designer for quite a few years now. I won't date myself by telling you exactly how many.
Okay, so you won't date yourself by telling us how many, but we're going to go through your journey today, so that might give away some clues.
All right. People can be Sherlock then. Okay.
So Senongo, let me start with, tech was not your original first plan when it came to a career path. So my first question is actually, how did you even get into tech? How did you become a designer?
So I went to Michigan, the University of Michigan, and spent my formative years, as a creative person, I guess, studying printmaking. Mm-hmm. And I was sure that I was going to become a printmaker, a digital lithographer. And during those years, when the Apple computers were still super new and the internet hardly existed, a lot of the stuff that I was doing as an artist was using polymer plates, which is just like a type of plastic plate, to print off images from a computer, duotone images, so just like black and white. I would ink those up and then print them to do like CMYK and 4-color separation prints. Mm-hmm. And I was sure that I was going to continue to do that. There weren't that many people in the world who were using that like printing technique, combining the digital world and then the printed. I think I had a teacher who very gently advised me to perhaps take a little bit of time away from school before I committed to going to get my master's. So I decided to go to Japan. And I went to Japan. I lived there in total for over 7 years, and for a long time, for about 4 or 5 years, I was an English teacher. So yet another kind of like weird career transition from being an artist to being a teacher. And while I was there, I started a company, and I made handbags, wallets, bracelets, and so on. Mm-hmm. And I needed a website to sell all this stuff. So I kind of dusted off some of my very, very old, Dreamweaver notes from when I was in college, pirated a copy of Dreamweaver from a torrent site, and taught myself how to code. And that was the point at which I became a designer rather than an artist, I guess. From there, I did that for a while, freelance. Moved to New York in 2010, got a job, my first real job as a designer in a marketing team at Cambridge University Press. And, that from there, I went to an agency for 5 years, and then most recently to Nava. And I've been here for almost 2 years now. So yeah, just steadily jumping around,
Yeah. And Senongo, I want to go back and touch on, you mentioned that you originally went to Japan, and when you came back, you were able to get a design role. I want to talk through that process because it's probably not as easy as we're making it sound. And so I want you to tell my listeners, what are some of the things that you had to do in order to actually land a role after coming back from being abroad?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I refuse to attribute this to anything but luck. There's many things that happen in life where if you work hard and you practice, like, you can increase your chances of luck. Perhaps that was the case here. But So arriving in New York, I think it was January 2010, was the height of the recession. Didn't know anybody in the city except for, you know, 2 or 3 people who weren't in the creative services world at all, like bankers, you know, friends of mine from college. And I was out of work, I think, for about 6 months. I got one gig doing just like some internship type of stuff at a place in Soho that paid a few bills. But I had sent out, I think I looked back at one point and it was, you know, over 130 resumes. And nobody was going to hire somebody who didn't have any professional design experience. Well, I was on my last month of rent, and I sent out a resume to Cambridge University Press. And it just so happened that the team that was hiring there was the English language teaching division of the press. And I used to use those books when I was a teacher. And so I noted that in my cover letter, you know, that I knew everything about their business essentially already, and got an interview and got hired. Blind luck. There's nothing else to it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it was difficult, you know, being out of work for that long and then like finally landing something, which was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think that's also going to be great for people who are, you know, this is now we're in the time of the great resignation.
Yeah.
And so people are looking for roles again and looking for jobs. And I think that's going to be a great kind of like inspiration piece there for them. So wanted to make sure to call that out. And also wanted to kind of transition into, okay, so you land your first job back in the US. What was that experience like, especially being that you had no experience for the role itself, you know, going into the position?
Yeah. Another really interesting question. So to kind of go back to what you were saying about the Great Recession, you know, what we see quite often, people changing careers, deciding to opt out completely, etc. I find it interesting that there's a lot of people in and out of tech, specifically the design world, who are coming in as a second career, people who have worked for years as, you know, program managers or have worked in HR for years and years, and finally are like, I want to do that instead. I want to make websites. I want to do research. I'm interested in user experience. And so they transition into the field. What we traditionally think about as like early career folks, and this is me again showing my age, is people who honestly don't know a lot about anything, don't know how to write emails, don't know how to communicate in a formal setting, are completely raw, and they don't have any real design experience. In so many cases, that's not in fact what's happening, and people are coming in with a lot of really strong professional experience, and this is like a new thing that they're growing into. So, you know, for me, I think it was similar going to Cambridge. I was a senior teacher and area trainer for a long time when I was in Japan. I wrote and delivered on-the-job trainings. You know, even went so far as to like pick up new teachers at the airport and bring them to their apartments. So I was a pretty senior person and did a lot of business schedule management, that sort of stuff, project management. So I had all of that when I came to Cambridge. And I just needed to then apply what little I knew about
Senongo, are you still there?
or how to present to an executive team. So yeah.
Great. And so in your first role, what are some of the skills that you picked up, being that, you know, you were newer to design, but you obviously had that creative spirit? So what are some of the skills that you picked up in order to be successful?
All right. So I don't think I have this on my my portfolio anymore, but for those who know, it's not a secret that the publishing industry is
Senongo?
Design development practices. Yes.
Hold on,
Can you hear
Senongo.
me?
No, you cut out. So let's start over from just the beginning of that answer.
Yeah, so can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, here, let me see here. It's not a secret that the publishing industry is a few years behind the tech industry as a whole. A lot of the things that we consider to be modern software design practices don't really get used or haven't been used in publishing very much. So when I went in there, I think one of the first things that I realized was I could add a lot of value to that team by just being the most up to date and the most modern possible. Because a lot of people didn't know. When I was at Cambridge, I was the one who built the first responsive websites at the company. And I just kind of did it on my own because I wanted to show people the power of the technology. So that was like an important lesson, is sometimes you have to kind of be cutting edge. And the second point I'll make there's an element of showmanship that I think can be important when it comes to design and when it comes to tech. So here's the use case. And I don't think this is on my my portfolio anymore, but I wanted to give a brown bag, like a lunchtime talk. And I wanted it to be focused on the ways that we can use content effectively in a digital setting. So a little bit of content strategy, a little bit of like visual design. And I realized that there was this great idea, which is about information sent. And it basically says that we must imagine that as humans, we are animals in a forest and we're hunting for information, AKA food, but it's a dark forest, it's scary, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't want, prickly porcupines and, pits and so on, dead links. And so it is the job of the designer to make the links and make the information on their site as attractive and as good smelling as possible. So you do a search for something on Google search results, and you look at the results, and you can kind of get a scent, a hint of like, is this going to be what I want? And you click on the thing that you want. Anyway, so I was going to do this whole talk about this. And the showmanship part that I'm talking about is I printed out a bunch of almost life-size animal headshots, like a gorilla, a giraffe, some parrots, like a lemur and stuff like that. And I stuck them all around the office, just on the walls. And I had these little notes that were like, do you know what your audience is clicking on? Or, where does that link go and stuff like that, and find out at the brown bag session. So all these people showed up and they're like super excited about the topic, but you got to kind of add a little jazz in there a little bit if you want people in organizations to really hear you and be interested in the stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah, add a little razzle dazzle, right?
A little razzle dazzle. That's right. Yeah.
I think too, when you do something like what you're mentioning, it shows the excitement that you actually have for the topic. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's missing sometimes when people are speaking or, just like trying to gather people to have a conversation. Sometimes it's missing that excitement. So you don't really know what you're walking into. But for me, if I saw that, that would create excitement in me too.
Yeah. And I think another realization, as we're talking about like career history and so on, is that the design industry, tech industry, I use those terms interchangeably, have really moved on from what they used to be. When I was first coming up, web designer / webmaster, we did everything. We coded, I taught myself how to code, use PHP, like figured out WordPress enough so that I could build whatever I wanted. That was what a designer did, was all those things, and the content strategy. And now, the industry has fractured, and we have front-end developers, content strategists, researchers, UX researchers, visual designers, UX, UI researchers. And it's very interesting, kind of this like, explosion, this evolution of all of the different types of roles that people can have So yeah.
Excellent. And one thing that I want to go back and mention is how you said that you did things that basically were not part of the job description. Like you just went above and beyond. And the reason that I want to go back and touch on that is because I feel like in today's group, because of everything that goes on at work, it's not easy to go above and beyond. And wanted to get your insights around that, of ways that, especially from a designer perspective or in any role, you can go above and beyond and really show your value like you did, like you said, for some of the work that you did.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. The older I get, I think the more jaded I get. I was young and excited, and I thought everything was cool, and I would be up until 3 o'clock in the morning, like coding new things. That was a period of time in my life, and that may be a period of time in listeners' lives. Like you're excited to do this stuff, and you don't care. You're just going to throw caution to the wind and do whatever it takes. Cool. I think remembering also that any job is an exchange of value, and you exchange the value that comes to you. You know, you get paid to do something, and then you do that thing. There are times when you want to extend that, but like the above and beyond shouldn't come at the expense of like your own personal life. It shouldn't come at the expense of your family, and you also shouldn't just do stuff without any possibility of, you know, a reward or you know, increased compensation and so on. Like you got to look out for yourself as well. So yeah, but I think there's an additional angle here, which is it's already rare to be a Black designer in America. You know, what are we, like 2-3% of the total population of designers? It's extremely rare. You know, I'm the VP of design. There are very few of us in the world, and you know, it's even more rare to have somebody who is extremely senior. You know, an art director, design director, creative director, VP, who is Black or a person of color. To the listeners, acknowledging that if you are Black, if you are a person of color, there are going to be times when you do have to do more in order to have your worth acknowledged. And it is a terrible, terrible system, and we work to change it. But to acknowledge that and to know that, you know, that's going to be the case sometimes.
You know what? Since we're on the topic, I do want to elaborate on that a little bit. As we know, tech from a holistic point of view, obviously, people of color are the minorities. But even if we get down, like you said, to that niche of like just looking at designers, the number is extremely small. From your perspective, what was that experience like? Because it sounds like in most cases, you probably were the only one in the room very often in your career.
Yeah. At Cambridge, definitely, you know, I would remember they would fly me out to Cambridge in the UK, you know, every few months or whatever. And sometimes I would go to like the annual leadership summit, and like I was the only Black person there. It's intimidating. Yeah, so I've been in that position a lot in my life. Even when I lived in Japan, there are, as you may expect, not that many Black people living in Japan. So yeah, you need to remember where you are, and you need to remember that like your 125% is often somebody else's 100%. It is just a fact of this society that we live in. But yeah, I think the corollary to that is you then blaze whatever trail you want to, and you pull people behind you, and make sure that the ranks come up behind you as well, so that other people don't have to be the only one, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And for people who are in that situation, because I love what you just said about your 100% could be someone else's, I believe you said 125% or vice versa.
Yeah.
For people who are in those situations, what tips or advice do you have for them in order to stay motivated and inspired when they get into those particular situations where what you're giving just might not be enough or exactly what someone's looking for?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think for designers, I will speak to designers since I am a designer.
Yes.
Don't neglect your portfolio. This is going to sound so mercenary, but let's have at it. It's important to make sure that in your portfolio, you're gathering the work that you want to be recognized for and that you want to be known for. Talk about yourself. For people who don't like portfolios, or they don't necessarily do that sort of thing. Maybe you're a front-end developer and like you can't just show a page of code. Writing at the end of the year your list of accomplishments, or the end of the month your list of accomplishments, so that you stay grounded in how you're improving. You're identifying the types of things that you want to do. I think that's important. Having a network outside of your work as well. Not every company is blessed with like a large population of people of color, or maybe you're working in a country which is not as diverse as you may want, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure that you have alternate networks of supporters, I think is super important as well. And that can be professional or it can be personal, but that's a way to ground yourself outside of not finding your self-worth only through work or the professional scene.
Yep. And you know what? We've been talking a lot about we got a little philosophical there. I want to return.
Sorry.
No, I enjoy it. So don't apologize. But I do want to return because you were talking about portfolio from a design perspective. And I want to get down to some of the nitty gritty details for people who are looking to be designers and listening to this podcast. So First question I want to go into before we actually say, what do you need to create in order to, show off your skills? First off, what skills do you even need to have an opportunity to be a designer?
It depends on what kind of designer.
Okay, let's even start off by breaking it down like that. What type of designer can you be in the tech industry?
Let me speak from my experience as the head of design at Nava. So Nava has a team of a little over 40 designers. We're broken down into a number of different skill areas, if you will, capabilities. So one of them is a content strategist. So we have a team of content strategists who are focused on strategy of language and words, making sure that interfaces have the information necessary. They're also focused on things like content audits, migrations of content from an old system to a new one, governance documentation. How does something get into a CMS? There's this whole world of content strategy, which is like a design profession, which is something that we really hold dear at Nava. We also have designer researchers. These are people who quite often have a strong grounding and a background in user experience research, finding out what people need, defining what those needs are, and then making recommendations, and in many cases turning around and then prototyping and building those things for them. And at Nava, we do a ton of research. It's what we're known for, because we simply can't operate without that insight into the communities that we design for. We also have a communications design team, so people more focused on branding, internal comms, website work, brochures and stuff like that. And we have front-end developers. They are designers, but they are much more tasked with taking the research, taking prototypes and so on that the designer researchers define, and then building them into usable tools, so that we can continue to test and iterate. Those people are heads down in code and design systems quite often, but they also conduct research as well. So like even within Nava, there's a whole range from the much more front-end technical to the much more content technical of types of roles that you can be. So yeah, it's difficult to say what skills somebody needs, but I think it's important to identify what you like, where you are in terms of your philosophy of design. Do you like the code? Do you like the words? Do you like imagery and brand? Do you like research? And then kind of build from there.
Let me ask the question this way, just based on your experience and the process that you went through. So from your experience, out of the roles that you've mentioned, what would you say you've successfully done from a design perspective?
Oh, wow. I was a front-end developer before they were called that. Nowadays, when I work with front-end developers, I use a tool like CodePen, or I'll spin up a little bit of code myself just to be able to use that to communicate. But I can't put together a website anymore unless it's like just flat HTML. Even then, so that is a skill that I have had. I have done a lot of user research, although not to the level that my team does at Nava. User interviews, prototyping, A/B testing, and so on. I've done service mapping, so service designer. So another type of designer that we have, looking at a holistic service, from end to end, the people and the tech involved. And at my last gig at Constructive, we did a lot of brand strategy, a lot of branding, brochure or websites and so on. So yeah, I have done a lot of this stuff, and I'm not great at any of it, but the fact that I have that experience, I think, makes it easier for me to integrate, when I need to turn my hand to it.
Okay, so I think one thing that I want to go back and touch on, you mentioned that your first job back when you came from Japan and you went to Cambridge so what was the exact title that you were given there?
I was, let me see. I was a marketing web designer.
And then, okay, so once you left Cambridge, what happened next?
So I went to a design agency in New York, and I was a senior designer. I was a senior designer there for a year and a half or so, and then was promoted to design director. And then was there for another 3 years as design director. Then I came to Nava. I was actually a design director for a few months, and then was promoted to VP. Yeah.
Okay, and so we keep using the term, well, you keep using the term design director. At that level, what does that actually entail in regards to what what your actual role is? What is kind of your day-to-day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely varies depending on the size of the company. On the agency side, it was smaller agencies, 10 people or something like that. So the design team was 4 people. So as design director, I was responsible for their growth and development, responsible for them, delivering work, and staying on schedule and so on and so forth. Was also responsible for bids, pitch work. People would email us and be like, hey, can you build us a website? We hop on a call and talk them through our process and show them work and so on and so forth. And then was also responsible for external events and so on to build the name of the company. But to answer your question, I would say at a smaller firm like that, probably 80% of my day was spent designing things, websites, brand materials, conducting research, and so on.
Okay. And so while you're going through all of these different roles and before you get to your current role as VP, what are some of the skills that you're learning? So for people who are listening to the podcast and, they want to become a designer and get involved in some way, what are some of the skills and tools that you're using during your journey?
Yeah. All right. Let me climb up on my little soapbox here. And I'm going to say that the first and most important thing that somebody should learn, get familiar with, understand if they want to become a designer is typography. This may be controversial, but it makes up such a huge and hidden proportion of how we interact with the world if we are sighted people, right? It makes up a huge part of how we communicate our ideas as designers, how we're able to convince, to delay, to argue, to bring joy is through type, through words, through their spacing, their size, the relative balance. It's a difficult thing to pull off. And I have done a lot of hiring in my life. One of the things that I think consistently hurts newer designers or designers in general is a lack of ability to typeset things correctly, to use typography effectively, because it muddles their message and it hides what they're trying to say. So yeah, that would be the first most important thing for me.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, you're the first designer that I've talked to that actually said that, but like thinking about it in theory, just think about, different marketing materials that you see on a, daily basis or whatever. That makes such a difference.
Yeah.
So much.
You begin to notice it. So, for people listening, think about, a block of text. It doesn't matter what the font is or anything else like that. It's just like a big old paragraph of text. It's probably like 7 or 8 lines long. And then ask yourself, like, as you're looking at it on a screen, and let's say you resize your browser, and that block of text keeps getting wider and wider and wider. At what point does that block of text become unreadable? And that is a very specific mistake that a lot of people make in their portfolios, is they'll just dump the block of text in there and they forget that, like, after a certain point, your eye gets lazy and you don't make it all the way across to the end of the line anymore because it's just too long across the screen. And so your eye lazily jumps to the next, but now you've lost the point of whatever's the messages in that paragraph. And so making sure that you limit the width of your text blocks, like making sure that there's balance in the header. Like, does the header actually look like a header? Is it separated from the thing before? All of that matters so much, and people consistently neglect it, and it hurts them.
Interesting. So I'm assuming though that you're speaking from an experience that is making you bring up this particular point. So is there any story that you can share in regards to this where you've learned this firsthand?
Let me see if I can anonymize this. This wasn't actually me. I had already learned this lesson, and there was somebody once who was kind of like, it didn't report to me or anything. It's just like, another designer, right? Mm-hmm. And they had some questions about how they might lay out a particular web page. It was an important page, like kind of a corporate type of page or whatever. And I realized that what they were doing was starting to add in like the wall of text, big old blocks, unreadable blocks, like a lot of scrolling. And so what I thought, very kindly offered to hop on a Skype call with them, dating myself there again a little bit, and like build out a wireframe to help them kind of reorganize this so it was more readable and that the type flowed better. And we did that, later on when the website went live, I saw that they had not used any of my advice and gone back to the way that they had it before. So that was a big mistake on my part, which is like, I thought that by simply communicating this stuff to them, they would get it. But there was actually, there was politics and alignment that needed to happen before I went into that. So when I talk about typography, it's, it has to be in service of the content and it has to be in service of the team. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So thank you for sharing all of those tools. And are there now we talked about some tools, but are there any additional resources? So let that be anything from like a website or anything that you recommend for designers or individuals who are looking to get into design to use in order to increase their skill level?
I'm going to very selfishly recommend my own book, which is called Cross-Cultural Design from A Book Apart. I wrote that a few years ago just to help people come to terms with how to design in a globalized world. But quite honestly, any of the books from A Book Apart are great. There are ones on front-end development, on content strategy, on meetings, all sorts of things. There's even books about what it takes to write a book, if that's your thing. So finding some of those, the publishers that have a lot of that content, I think is a good place to look. Don't get too wrapped up in the dribbles and, Site Inspires and those types of places of the web. They're great for a little bit of inspiration, but like, don't get bogged down in trying to find perfect matches for what you're trying to design. Podcasts like this, like different public talks, I think are also a really great way to just hear from other people and do it in a light way without like expending too much energy, just to get a little dash of inspiration.
So Senongo, I know you don't think you're going to leave the episode without talking about what is actually the content covered in your book. And also, I want to know the reason why you decided to even write a book.
Yeah. When I first moved to New York, like I said before, it's 2010. I was still super new in my career. And, one of the things that I wanted to do was to grow, to make a name for myself. Like, it's New York, you got to stand up a little bit. And I started thinking about ways that I might, get some speaking gigs. And was not really that great at anything, but I finally got one speaking gig. And I wanted to talk in that about, cross-cultural design. And the only reason I got it was Denise Jacobs, who's a speaker and a designer as well, had some small interactions with me on Twitter, and I had given her a recommendation about something, and so then she put me in touch with these people and was like, "He should speak at your conference." So I went, that talk was about cross-cultural design, and so the idea percolated in my head, years and years and years. And 7 years later or whatever, I finally then got the chance to write a book about it. And it's kind of like the culmination of all of my experiences. I'm Nigerian. I grew up in Nigeria to a Nigerian father and an American mother. I went to an international school, moved to cold Michigan, for 5 years. Moved to Japan for, another 7 years plus. And so then was in New York, right? And what I wanted to say was the world that we live in is so, varied, fractured, different in so many respects, so different, in fact, that like, you can't even imagine how different people see the world from you. And if we're to really be successful as designers, we have to get out of this Western, Swiss design mentality and start to make choices that account for a wider, variety of people, a variety of experiences, a variety of, languages, internet connections, so that was kind of the inspiration there.
And, speaking of just your upbringing and the different cultures and experiences that you've been around, how do you feel like that's influenced how you view design?
So I think growing up in Nigeria, we Nigeria is, it's not fabulously wealthy except for, a few pockets and a few, families. I grew up in the bush. There's not much around there. It's dusty. We didn't have, there's not running water in my house. It's well water, electricity sometimes, not always, etc. It's a dirt road past my house. And you got to be somewhat creative when you live in an environment like that. You kind of have to make do with a few things. And we were more blessed than others, definitely. But yeah, growing up, you kind of realize there are certain constraints, and you kind of, you accept those constraints, and then you make something out of what you have left. And I think the same thing is true with design. There are certain constraints that we have. The browser is a constraint. You can't touch a website yet. The quality of a paper, the thickness of it is a constraint. You could print more heavily on it or lighter. The number of characters in a box, that's a constraint. And so I find that very interesting. I think my upbringing, coming from not as much as other people, kind of forced me to think about that in that way.
And I want to talk through basically the inclusivity of design, because as much as we think about tech and, diversity and inclusion, I don't think that a lot of times we consider it from a design perspective. And I feel like some of those conversations around design inclusivity is limited. I don't know if that's your experience as well.
Yeah, I think the word has, diversity has been twisted. I don't mean that in a totally negative way, but I mean it has expanded. Maybe this is a better way to say it, is it's expanded to account for a lot of different opinions and different perspectives, not all of which are an honest way of looking at things. Like, people use it in, I think, a negative context as well. So diversity as a goal, sure, that's good. I think that, in all the teams that I've worked on, they have been made stronger by the fact that it's people from, different worlds, different languages, different religions. The design industry has a lot of work to do to get to a place where the teams that do the work look like the people that they're designing for. And yeah, there's so many things that I think happen in the design industry. And you realize that if the person who had designed that interface or the person who had made that thing actually looked like the person who needed to use it or had their experience, it would have been a completely different thing. So just a point about that.
So I'm going to put you on the spot with two probably relatively heavy questions.
All right, go ahead.
First question is, in order to be kind of like a overall more inclusive design from a tech perspective, what are some ways that you think, we'll keep it limited to 3 ways that you think that companies should start putting into their process in order to be inclusive to everyone?
Do you mean on the internal side, like bringing people into the company, or do you mean in the things that they make?
In the things that they make side.
Yeah. So number 1 is actually do your research. Companies like, I think it was IKEA, spent years and years in Southeast Asia learning the market before they decided to enter, to be able to build, culturally relevant and specific materials and goods to understand the total market. Like, there is an imperative to conduct research, to talk to people, to speak in their language, so that when you create things for them, you understand, and they become you become them. So I think that would be one very important thing. And I think the second is having internal systems that allow you to be as flexible as possible. So very concrete design example, which is text length. The length of a word in Chinese could be different than Japanese, could be different than German, could be different than English, could be different than Tagalog. And making sure that your design systems, the way that you have your Figma files set up, like all of that, allow you to quickly prototype and iterate on that sort of thing, gets you to market faster. It gets your product out there. And, the person who speaks German, maybe the word might be longer. It doesn't get broken off in the button. And they're like, ew, these people didn't design this thing for me. I'm not going to use it. It's not for me. And the last is the things that you show people have to look like them. The pictures that you use in your marketing, the illustrations in your app, they gotta reflect the person who's looking at it. Yeah, that's more of a branding and like a brand strategy side. But yeah, you can't use pictures that don't reflect your audience.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I don't want to see a product of someone who doesn't look like me, but you're trying to attract me to your product. That doesn't really work.
That's right.
Now, I am going to ask a very, very hard question. Not sure if you're going to be able to answer this one.
Go ahead.
What is the worst design that you've seen created?
The worst design that I've ever seen created.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, maybe a cluster bomb. I've never actually seen one, but I've seen them, I know what they're like. Little tiny bombs that look super shiny so that kids pick them up.
Oh.
Like a cluster munition state, it's a big bomb that breaks into lots of tiny bombs. And they've got these little like wings on them and so then they fly through the air and they can go all different directions, like little seeds of death. They're banned munitions, but countries still use them. And little kids, you're playing out in the field and you see this bright yellow shiny thing, pick it up.
Wow.
Yeah. Like the process that a human has to go through to design such a thing, that's really something else.
Yeah.
That's dark. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, it's honest.
You asked.
Okay, I'm gonna bring it back to light. What is the coolest design project or item that you've ever seen?
Oh, coolest. I don't know. I mean, I really enjoy all of the the branding and the web projects that are coming out right now. There was a long time ago, Nike did a website called, I think, A Better World, which was one of the first truly parallax websites, and they used a bunch of JavaScript to design it. For those people who were in the design industry when that thing launched, it was an absolute revolution to use JavaScript, and HTML and CSS to design something that was responsive to the scroll action was like, wow. And everybody started going out and building these scrolly telling websites, me included. That was, it was just a sea change in the industry, very much like when, Ethan Marcotte like pioneered responsive design, and then everybody was like, oh my God, the world has opened up and now we can do all of this new stuff. So those would be two examples.
Okay, excellent. And to end our conversation today, I know we kind of skimmed through your experience, but I do want to give the listeners a little bit more insight into what you do in your current role at Nava. So why don't you tell us a little bit of like what your day to day is like, because now it sounds like you're not too much in the nitty gritty from a design perspective, but want to hear more about that and what you do from a day-to-day perspective.
Yeah. So Nava is a public benefit corporation. We work with government stakeholders, on the state and the federal level to transform like services, different programs and entire agencies. that are serving vulnerable or underserved populations. The goal and the idea here is that there's a lot of trust that's been lost with public institutions. You go into the DMV and you got to wait for 3 hours, even though your appointment said 2:30, you're still there at 3:30. Loss of trust. There's people applying for public benefits who think that they qualify and they send in the paperwork and then they don't get accepted, like loss of trust. And so we believe that we can use technology, the power of the internet and the power of our thinking, quite practically, to transform that and to help public institutions build trust. So my day-to-day isn't in designing things necessarily. It's in making sure that the design team is set up to succeed with the different clients and the different programs that we have that's doing that work. So whether it's making sure that hiring processes are streamlined so that teams can get staffed up quickly, like that will be something that I do. Whether it's working with the executive team to roll out a new line of business or a new policy or a new report or something like that, doing that so that our teams can be more successful. So yeah, I've done a lot of design in my life, and I think right now my job is to help other people be better designers and help other people contribute to the company mission in the best way that they can. I don't have to get my hands dirty anymore, and I think that's that's a nice place to be.
You know what? That's a great segue to my next question, which is, if someone is looking to become a better designer, what tips or advice do you have for them?
Yeah, understand typography. I would die on that hill. You got to understand type. You got to understand, just visual structure. That's one thing. People have to be willing to try things. They have to be willing to kind of step out of their comfort zone and fail a lot and fall on their face a lot. But it's in that quick iteration and picking yourself up that I think really, cool things can happen. It's the practice part of it. And I think, just quite frankly, every designer should try their hand at performing real user research, talking to people. Watch someone use the website that you just designed. If you've never done it before, just watch what they do. And it's in doing that you better understand like the power that you have, the thing that you make, like how it can change somebody's life for the better or for the worse. It can annoy them, or it can make them get the job done faster. So being able to do that research and understand what users need, I think is like a critical role of design.
Excellent. And, we've talked about your experience in design, tools and resources that anyone listening to the episode can use. 2 questions to end our episode and our time today. The first one is, I want to ask this other one first. The first question is, we've talked about all these cool projects and even bad ones. What is the coolest design project that you've actually done?
Oh, wow. Okay. This is actually a personal project. So for those who know me, I'm super interested in history. And I built a website and did a bunch of research, basically built an archive of art, historical artifacts, stories, documents, maps, and so on, of 15th and 16th century naval exploration. The premise of the story is that, there was a diary found. This diary was written by a Black Portuguese ship captain, in the 15 and 1600s. And, around that time, Portugal was one of the largest seafaring nations in the world. And they were some of the first Europeans to reach Japan in their trade expeditions. And this sailor was a captain on one of those ships. And so it's his, a series of life stories that's kind of mixed with, historical and archival images. And I really, it's a project that I just enjoyed making so much, building the website and like putting everything together, making sure that the story was as clear as possible. So yeah, a personal project, but it mixed my love of history with my love of web design, my love of illustration, could put it all together.
Yeah.
It's called
Go ahead.
Captain Da Costa. Yeah.
Nice. I like that you have all of your like creative interests come together on one project,
Yeah.
And my final question today is just around the future of design. So obviously design over the years has definitely changed, and we've talked about that a little bit in this conversation, but how do you see design shifting in the next couple of years? What do you see the future being?
Oh, that's a tough one. In the past, I have commented on the fact that I think design systems will become a lot more autonomous. Whereas now we expend a lot of energy in code, in Figma, in Sketch, defining very complex design systems. What might happen when we overlay simple, artificial intelligence to those, to say things like, hey, system, I want a brand identity, or I want a design system with big chunky buttons, lots of blue, kind of like a sky blue, and like a funky sans serif type. And it will say, bleep, bloop, bloop, here you are, sir. And it'll give you all of that, and you kind of flip through the options and choose one you like. And like the Figma file will be all set up for you. Maybe. The idea scares me because it removes a lot of agency from designers. But in the same way that potters and ceramicists used to be in critical demand to make earthenware for everything from carrying wine to food, and now it's mostly an artistic endeavor. Like perhaps that's where interactive design would go in the future, but I don't know, not in the few years. Yeah.
And Senongo, we've covered quite a bit in today's episode. Want to open the floor to you, though. Any additional comments or parting words that you want to give my guests today, or give my audience today?
Well, I would be, super excited to hear from people. For those who are considering a career in civic tech, Nava is very often hiring, not only for design but other roles. So please check us out at navapbc.com. And just would encourage people to try new things, right? Like read weird books, read them in languages that you don't understand. Get a design book in Swahili and use it for something. There's all these sorts of ways that I think we can flex and make the design community more reflective of who we are. So yeah.
And then also, Senongo, if anyone wants to connect with you outside of this podcast, where's the best place that they can find you?
So my website is senongo.net. And you can see some of my work is up there, like the story Captain Da Costa that I was telling you about. There's a case study that I have of that work up there. Twitter is probably the easiest place that I'm on, publicly most often. So yeah, I would say either one of those places you can get in touch with me.
Awesome. Well, Senongo, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And I'm sure the listeners really appreciate learning more about you and hearing your story.
All right, Dina, I've enjoyed it. I hope these answers made sense to somebody besides me. So yeah, it's been fun.
Excellent.
I can make my world come true. All my dreams will see me through. And if that will get me down, my dreams will turn things all around. With a smile upon my face, I can see a better place. Doesn't matter what blow. I can